Hello. Welcome back to Love at First Right with our theme song here, Right by Your Side, which is just a fabulous Eurythmic song that that really captures what it is I'm talking about here because my name is Victoria Doherty, and I have historically been a historical spy thriller writer who writes mainly in the Cold War genre, but also some World War II stuff. And a couple of years ago, I set my sights on writing an epic romance. But it's really, more, at least in sort of genre speak, romance adjacent because it's got elements of fantasy and mystery and history. It has a strong historical element and paranormal element, and so it just, it's very cross genre. But what we're going to be talking about today is something that really ties all genres together, and that is the character of the outlier. Outliers are incredibly compelling, and really, I can't think of any character, either in literature or film or even nonfiction, um, who well, any character that I'm extremely compelled by who isn't an outlier. Outliers make the most delicious characters, and they're the ones that we somehow most relate to. Even those of us who seem like we are not at all outliers, right? Who have a ton of friends or seem to have it all, in that sense. One of the things that I think we share as human beings is that we all feel like outliers. We are born alone and we die alone, and that is the fact. And we carry that with us throughout our lives, no matter how many people we surround ourselves with, no matter how vibrant our careers are, or how big and rambunctious our family life is, we are still alone, and we are tremendously compelled by it and drawn into it. And fiction, in all of its forms, addresses the outlier. In horror, the outlier is can either be someone who becomes a monster, literally becomes a monster, like a vampire or a werewolf, or a ghost, or must fight a monster, often alone, and does this in order to, if he's fighting the monster, he does it to transcend his outlier status, somehow make it a part of himself that he can use as a superpower instead of something that makes him feel other and alone. Or in horror, the outlier can be consumed by it. The werewolf who is then shot by the silver bullet, and again goes into being alone, alone into the void of death. That whole sort of story of isolation is at the core of everything. In romance, every romance, real romance, ends with a happy ending, right? With a couple coming together. That is, an absolute necessity of the genre that you must nail. Nobody reading romance wants to read a romance that the two characters don't end up together, and yet the outlier is a central figure in the romance. It is usually the person who feels so alone and finally finds someone with whom they can share their weird little life with, who understands them on a soul level, who might, in some ways, share their experiences or understand them, because this character has usually started out feeling alone and not understood and not a part of things. Gosh, in historical fiction, say, the character might not start out as an outlier or might not seem as an outlier in the beginning, but historical forces might thrust them out into the cold and alone. Perhaps they become an outlier because they are a Jew and they're living in Nazi Germany. Or somehow, like in Dr. Zhivago, they become separated from their families. And in sci-fi and fantasy, you have genres. That is the ultimate outlier genre, right? Because not only is the main character most often an outlier, but the writer or filmmaker is creating an outlier world. It's a world none of us know that they are introducing us to. We we as authors must do our best when we are writing our characters who will most certainly be outliers to connect them to our readers, to make our readers feel as if they are experiencing what that character is experiencing, even if that character is nothing like us from the outside, even if that character is handsome or beautiful or talented or an alien, or a foreigner from a country that is nothing like or seems nothing like our own. It is incumbent upon us as the creators of that world and that character to make that character relatable. And this outlier status, this feeling of other that we all feel, is a tremendous anchor in almost any story. Being able to play that up in a character goes so far in being able to make your character relatable to your reader, no matter how out there they may seem. Um, Even when you're reading for perhaps a character like the oh gosh, the Swedish writer, the girl with the dragon tattoo, that's it, who is autistic and who is, such an outlier, and she is odd. And we know that most of us who are not autistic know we are not like her. And yet we understand that feeling that she has of walking through the world and seeing things that others do not see, because we think that this is a trait that only we have, and yet it's one that we all share to some extent or another. We have all been in a situation where we see things that we at least believe others don't see, even if it's not true. Sometimes the story is about the fact that no one will address the fact that we all know that the emperor has no clothes, that the dictator is a tyrant, even though we are kowtowing to him, that what we are spouting we do not really believe. And as we as we develop these characters, it really does manifest itself in very different ways depending upon the character. The villain will be a very different kind of outlier than the hero, because the hero will be an outlier because they are there to save others, perhaps, or save himself. But the villain is an outlier precisely because they are willing to cross a line that most people, thank goodness, are not willing to cross. They are willing to kill. They are willing to destroy in order to rebuild. They are willing to take for themselves at the cost of others. And that is the ultimate outlier status. And with minor characters or more minor characters, even groups of characters, that outlier status can manifest itself through extreme groupthink, through tribalism, through not standing up for what is right. I think of To Kill a Mockingbird and the people of that town who are willing to sell an innocent man down the river because they are not willing to go against the tide. Only Atticus Finch is willing to go against the tide and defend this man in a court of law and say, no, this is not right. He is innocent, and he is only in this courtroom because of his race, which many in the town might have known, but they were not going against the tide, because to go against the tide would further make them an outlier. It just drives us in every possible way. It drives every character we write. It drives every situation we're in. And I think that if we approach our stories from that perspective, if we really understand how every single thing our character does is driven by this status as an outlier, this very human element, then we are able to really draw our readers in and make a character that they can relate to and a book that they absolutely cannot put down. So I hope this has been helpful. It's been helpful for me because I've, it's really, I need to say these things out loud and I need to think them through, especially as I sit down to write a new book, which I'm starting this week. I've just finished an outline to book 2 of this fantasy romance series that I'm writing. The first one is coming out in the spring. And as I sit down to write it, in this second book, it is also partly from the point of view of the male lover, the male protagonist. And the first book was entirely from the female protagonist's point of view. And so I'm having to revisit. I know what kind of outlier she is and how she became so, but now I'm having to build from scratch this other character who I have only seen through the eyes of my female protagonist. So that's going to be quite a challenge, and I bet that you all have your own challenges this week as you endeavor to write your stories or read your stories. Thank you.